Hi, welcome to Heart Change You Live. We are here to help equip you to touch the lives of others around you. I'm here today with Heather and David, and our producer Matthew is in the control room. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know. He can throw them to us and join the conversation.
And let me throw in, you said comments or questions, but the idea is equipping you to touch the lives of those around you. So it can actually be situations. It can be, I'm going through this, I'm struggling with this, I don't know how to handle this. So add those kinds of things in as well as comments and questions.
So okay, today's topic, or the title of today, is Talking to a Wall. So Heather, what's that about?
So it just came to me as Pastor and I were having a conversation this morning. You know, the frustration that can come in, we all know it, when I feel like I'm communicating perfectly, effectively, honest, straightforward truth, and nothing. Or it's completely, it's like the telephone game, you know, where what is received at the end of the line is nowhere close to what came out at the front of the line. And this is so, it can be especially frustrating for people who are living with those who are in addiction or suffering with addiction, people who suffer from impulsivity. And I've been there where you just think, did you hear anything that I just said?
It's kind of, la, 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 la.
Right. And so, you know, thinking about people who, and we all are, we're all touched by addiction. We all have people who we're related to, we work with, we're friends with, where it's a life and death situation. And so the frustration almost, because it seems like the stakes are higher. For me, it feels like the frustration can get higher when I'm really trying to effectively speak into someone's life and they just can't hear.
And the word you use there, can't. Really, sometimes the effective word is can't. Now, sometimes the effective word is won't.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's times when they're just being stubborn or whatever you want to attribute it to, where they really do get it, but they're, you know, I did my thing, you know, la, 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 I can't hear you, you got your ears plugged. So sometimes there is a won't, and they're choosing not to. They want what they want, and so they're just flat doing that. But many times it is can't. I just can't hear you. I can't understand you.
Okay, so let's give an example, like, of this situation. Do either of you have an example we can use?
Oh my goodness, pick a card, any card, right? It's like, what I was thinking about is that I was trained as an interventionist, and in the typical intervention model, it's understood that a family or people closest to the addict are going to have a harder time getting through because it comes so loaded, you know, with so many emotions and stories and, you know, family ties and history and all that kind of stuff. So there's a prevailing wisdom that you need to bring someone in from the outside who will be an impartial party. But often, even in that, the addict is coming in feeling defensive, like what's going on? Why are all these people here?
There seems to be a lot of times of, like, even if you bring in somebody that's impartial, the addict will see it as, well, they're on your side anyway.
That can happen. Let me give a quick example. I was speaking with someone actually this morning who relatively new, you know, just talking with other people. And I said, well, how's it going? Well, I'm having issues. And it was kind of like, okay, what's going on? And he said, well, and I love this. He was at least self-aware enough to say, I struggle whenever there's sarcasm. And so there's a particular individual that was in his circle who had thrown out a couple of sarcastic comments, but the individual, again, just loving, caring, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, you're having a problem with person X, you know, I don't feel like I want to say a name. And so that brings up the whole idea of triggers. And I said, well, okay, I know this person. I know what they put out on a consistent basis. The probability that you're actually responding to this person is extremely low. So what you're responding to at that point is not that person and not that situation, but it's a trigger. And triggers, again, are a big part of this talking to the wall. And in this particular instance, it goes back to a father. It goes back to different individuals in their life who had been highly sarcastic. Well, what do I talk about? In the spirit realm, you've got this whole spiritual capacity that's mostly subconscious.
Right.
So if I come along and I happen to have the right cologne, I happen to say the right words, I say the right words in the right way, in this particular instance, sarcasm, I say the right words in the right way, all of a sudden that goes back and reaches into a file and brings up all of this stuff at a subconscious level. What did we talk about right off the top? There's can't and there's won't. So if all of a sudden I reach back in there and I wake up all of this stuff at a subconscious level, I'm not even aware of it. And I'm having a response to you that has been triggered, that has brought up all of these instances of sarcasm in the past. And then those sarcasms, they all have their own set of trappings. It's kind of like, all right, when this sarcasm came, I felt this way. I felt belittled. I felt unimportant. I felt etc. So now I have one trigger that's bringing up all of this stuff, and I'm seeing, and I like to do it this way, I'm seeing through literally the little cracks in my fingers as I'm responding to that, and I'm trying to hear you through that. There's no way I can hear you through that.
I've even had this happen to myself, where something's happened. I can't even remember the exact instance. I just remember the feeling of it. Something happened and it triggered something inside me, and I just like it just blew up inside of me. It was not a proportional response.
Right.
And
that's when I know I've been triggered, is
Right.
when I'm like, I don't know. Yeah.
I shouldn't
I'm
be
so
this
amped
upset
up.
about this little thing.
Right.
Yes, it was a thing, but it's not this size of thing. It's a this size.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, I've heard him talk about this, but until you go through it, it's like, okay.
And what's interesting, the foundational layers, and again, I talk about the step-by-step series, but the foundational layers almost always go back to the early years. Now, what I believe, and I think you can quantify scripturally, Psalm 139, I believe that a person's spirit is God-breathed. So literally, from the beginning, you have a spirit that is functioning, that is recording. Part of my proof for that, obviously, you have Jacob and Esau already fighting in the womb. Another part of it is, if you go to the modern world, there's a lot of instances where people are responding to things that seemingly happened in the womb at an early enough level when the brain really wasn't functional to the degree that you can really attribute it to brain function. I myself actually have that kind of an example where my mom went through a period of not wanting another child. And, I'm 40, I wake up and I'm praying about it, and I had a sense of God speaking to me that I was an unwanted child. I had never heard that. Within the next 2 weeks, tell me God isn't orchestrating this. Within the next 2 weeks, my mom tells me this story about how she had been in tears for the first several weeks of my life because she did not want another child. And so here I have this rejection that I'm dealing with. I've got all of this stuff. And what really explains that, if you take the biblical model, if there is a spirit that is God-breathed and that is in existence from the beginning, that again, I'm not necessarily aware of, because that operates separate from the brain stem, that operates from that. There's a spiritual dynamic to us that is above, beyond, outside of what normal science talks about. But if you follow that through and you track what happened in the womb, all of a sudden you start finding out that people often respond inside of that. If I was in rejection in the early days, I'm responding out of rejection. If there was a huge fear overload, I have high levels of anxiety. Many times, and they know this is true, many times what happens in the womb ends up being incredibly significant in terms of laying down this foundation to where now I'm responding out of that foundation, and no, I can't hear you.
Right. No, I kind of getting off track from the addiction thing, but as an addict, I can definitely attest to what you're talking about. Just yesterday, I had an experience where I didn't want to burden others with what I was feeling. what was going on with me. I have a tendency to take that. I talk about it behind my wall. Me and God, we're going to work that out, and then I'll come out and I'll report to you what God and I
After it's all solved.
After it's solved, and then I'll, that's the level of vulnerability I'm comfortable with. But it's so interesting because that idea of being a burden has come up throughout my life, and part of that had to do with being unexpected. I was an unexpected pregnancy. My dad had just gotten maybe he hadn't even started. I think he was still in school, but his dream job was to be a police officer. That's all he wanted to be. And then all of a sudden, here's a kid. What do we do? And so they definitely, my parents have shared with me that they struggled. Not only was I a financial burden, but also a hindrance on my dad and my mom. But I'm a daddy's girl, and everybody knows that. I kept my dad from fulfilling his dream. Mm-hmm. And I've carried that around and have put that on other people where, and I believe it's dark forces that have tried to convince me that the world would be better off without me. And I've talked to numerous addicts that for one reason or another have that belief. So it looks like we're doing things, you obviously don't care about anybody. But the truth is we care so deeply about other people that we convince ourselves either that they're not going to be hurt by what I'm doing or they'll be better off without me. And so we disappear, we act crazy, we do things that, are literally hell-bent,
Mm-hmm.
So when there are foundational layers like that are laid down in a person, and I say this and everybody, their eyes cross and roll and everything else, but they respond inside of where they are spiritually. So that's an example. That level of burdenness, burden, whatever, is laid down there. And so now the rest of my life, unless that gets healed, unless that gets transformed, literally the rest of my life, I'm hearing everything I hear inside of that filter. I'm in there and I'm like, am I being a burden? Am I not being a burden? What can I do not to be a burden? And with me, it was rejection. I struggled with high levels of rejection. And what was neat, once that came to the surface, and I prayed through that in the way that you can pray through that to get to a place of healthiness, I can remember that's one of those times where there was like an immediate change. Mm-hmm. I mean, immediate, deep, lasting change that I didn't fight. Now, there are other kinds of things you don't get those changes from. It's nice when you get one like that, and I don't know that the burden, and here's what's different. For me, the rejection really wasn't my core. It wasn't the deep part of me. For you, you've got a lot of that caregiver stuff going on in you. So being a burden, it's just like it just gnaws at that whole idea of being a caregiver. I mean, that wasn't something that was laid down on you that we can pray a prayer over and remove. It's like that's just core to your being. Mm-hmm. And so walking out of that one is going to take a lot more work over a period of time.
I'm only just now seeing the tendrils that it has in so many areas of my life. Like the performance piece, I've got to make my own way. I've got to be sure to carry my own load. You got to earn your keep. These are all messages that have floated around in my brain.
Those all say don't be a burden.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Do your own stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you have something like that directly combats one of her core values, those are always going to be, are they going to be more painful or deeper somehow because it goes against? Because you said yours wasn't necessarily against one of your core values.
Mine wasn't, that particular one wasn't as deeply intertwined in my core values, so it was much easier to pray over that, get forgiveness, get a release, and then I wake up the next day and I really do see life from a different point of view.
So is it kind of like a weed that has deeper roots?
Yes. That's a great illustration, dandelions, if you will, or whatever, deeper roots and wider spread, I mean, it's kind of like, You might get this one, but there's 100 more that just popped up. And so you have that. When it's tied into your character and it's so close to your character, it's going to have roots, tendrils, whatever. It's going to have things every kind of direction. And so you take care of this particular one. It's like, okay, I'm good. Oh no, you're looking around and it's like, I got a storm.
Weeds everywhere.
Yes, I have weeds everywhere. And so it can be very defeating at that point where you're looking at this going, wow, I got another one and another one and another one. And I don't feel like I'm any farther along than I was before.
So, okay, what if you're a family member looking from the outside in? You're watching your family member or friend dealing with these things. How do you help them?
Well, let me start by not answering your question, which I'm pretty famous at doing. A lot of times if you're a family member, you got some of the same stuff. So sometimes that helps if they've actually walked it through and they're...
Is this the fix yourself first answer?
Yeah, that might be. But,
Yay!
But a lot of times, you've got some of the same blindnesses and you've got some of the same issues coming along. Or if you don't fix yourself first, I mean, that's the pot calling the kettle black. It's kind of like the other person's looking at you going, excuse me.
Who do you think you are to tell me about this?
So that actually comes in that. But outside of that, we'll just put that away, and you just happen to be perfect and you don't have the same issues. And so all of that's there.
You walk around with a halo.
Another piece that is so incredible in all of this is authority. Different people are going to be willing to give you different levels of respect, different levels of authority. And as a family member, sometimes the answer is zero, ain't happening. And so if the more you batter that door, at some point, it's not going to work because they're not giving you authority and they're not giving you that respect, and you're trying to break the door down. Well, how do most people respond when the door is being broken down?
They reinforce it.
Exactly. And so it just simply doesn't happen. And so then you've got another entire dynamic there. In terms of, there are times when the person is going to be open. There are people the person will be open to. There are people the person will be closed to. There are times when the person is open. There are times when it's closed. And so especially as a family member, all of that sensitivity level just goes up and up and up to where it's like, okay, I better choose my times. I better choose my wording. I've got to be actually a lot of times more careful with a family member. And guess what we tend to do? We tend to be less careful with family members. Mm-hmm. Your mom, your dad, your whatever. I have the right. I should be able to. And so
a prophet is not without honor except in his home.
Except in his own home.
Right.
And so the family member piece does make it difficult. And the number one rule I'm going to give you, if it's with family, slow down, pray, less is more. Are we on a theme here? Are we on a roll here? Wait, stop, consult, because again, it's familiar. So we feel okay jumping in with both feet in the middle of that, and we've just created another offense in all kinds of different ways.
And this is a conversation you and I had this morning about the importance of waiting, listening. Sometimes I think, especially when we're dealing with a life or death type of situation where, like I said, the stakes are really high. Or maybe it's an issue where there are children involved. And, I became very aware when my brother-in-law became an addict or found out that he was an addict, that I was not going to be effective in speaking into his life, because in my mind, he's my niece's father. And all I can see is, what about this little girl? So I turned him over to some other men who could speak into his life at a crucial point. So, choosing your timing, I think, is also crucial. The the way most people have worked with addicts in the past has been to wait for them to hit a bottom, right? To wait until they're at their low point. You talk about in the life cycle, until they're in humility, they're really not going to hear anything. So
let me jump in on what I would call a broad topic. As human beings, we are spiritual presence people. God describes it this way. He created us as a temple for Him, for His presence. So there's times when we are able, as a human being, we're able to drink in the peace of God, the joy of God, the love of God, and that's actually a more temporal thing. So if I've been in a worship service and I've been singing songs and I felt the presence of God and etc., for that brief period of time, it's almost like I'm transformed into a different person. And spiritual presence is very immediate. So here I am worshiping, life's good, and then my wife turns to me and reminds me of something that, in the middle of the worship service, of something that I was supposed to have done that was really important to her. I didn't take the trash out, whatever. I mean, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, the spirit is just broken, and it's like, how dare you? I was enjoying myself, and I was in a good place. And think about the spiritual dynamic. Literally, at one moment, life is good, and at the next moment, it's very, very different. And that's one of the things that's incredibly powerful. People respond. People hear according to whatever's going on spiritually, that spiritual presence factor at the moment. And so what I have learned, again, you can call it a counseling technique or whatever. I'm a manipulator. Take it wherever you want to take it. But I have learned that if I'm able to approach someone with the peace of God, it's one of the most powerful things that I do. So a person comes in and they're in a mess and etc. If their world doesn't destroy my world, that's half the battle.
right.
I deal with some high-level crises over and over and over and over again. And one of the biggest keys is, if I'm able to stay in peace, I believe in another concept that I call spiritual headship. If I'm able to stay in peace, the peace of God, light overcomes darkness. So the peace of God at some point is going to make inroads. It's going to begin to have an impact. So if I maintain that peace, what happens? The spiritual presence of that other person begins to change.
Well, and not only, you're kind of talking about maintaining peace, but, I can't remember if it was in church or if we were talking about it, but talking about the spiritual dog that you feed is going to be the stronger one. You can't suddenly, have been feeding the pride dog and expect to suddenly have a powerful humility moment,
Right.
And maintain humility. Like, you have to feed that dog continually if you want to maintain peace.
And you can't, what you're saying is absolutely true, and that's true over a period of time, but spiritual presence is much more quickly and easily moved than that. I call it the substance. So if you've developed a character that is prideful, and it's deep, and it's abiding, and it's intertwined, for that person to move into humility is going to be a much harder step than for the person who's cultivated humility over a period of time. And I say it, what flows through you sticks to you. Over a period of time, if you spend 23 hours and 59 minutes and 30 seconds in pride, that 30 seconds of humility that day probably isn't going to have major impact. So over a period of time, what flows through you sticks to you. It begins to develop a deeper character substance piece. So if I'm working with you and I'm trying to get you to listen, the first thing I know is you're not going to be receptive until the spiritual dynamics are there. And I may only get the spiritual dynamics for a few minutes. But if I'm spending time with you and I'm listening to you and I'm asking questions and I sincerely care, it's not a manipulation technique. I sincerely care. I'm hoping that at some point you begin to respond to that and you move from maybe anxiety more to peace, or you move from bitterness to more of a released point of view. Once I see that spiritual transition beginning to happen, now you and I can sit down and have a reasonable conversation with one another.
Yeah, this morning, one of the things that we talked about quite a bit is, I don't know, I'm putting this in my own words, is kind of dropping my own agenda when I'm going in to have a conversation with somebody. And, you know, this is hard when you truly do know what is best. Like, legitimately, you really do know it is not best for you to go do that. But man, can we smell that on somebody or what? You know, you're coming in here with an agenda at me, and I know I'm being manipulated. So what I'm hearing is, if I feel like I'm talking to a wall, I probably brought the wall without realizing it.
Well, back to addicts, and again, the heart change approach. I don't believe that you can grow or get better unless you actually embrace it. Now, I can force compliance. If you want to roof over your head bad enough, and our program has certain rules and et cetera, I can force compliance, but that's not heart change. So if I come to you knowing I have that authority and I'm going to force it on you, I know that I'm not going to get near as far on the long term. On the big picture, I might get short-term results. But in terms of the big picture, as if I come to you and say, let's just talk. And I don't necessarily come to you with an agenda of, I'm going to force this behavior. Mm-hmm. If I come in with an agenda of, I'm going to force this behavior, my chances of us having a good conversation that is meaningful are extremely low. I try to come into those conversations not really knowing where we're going to go, and being open to God and open to the voice of God and saying, okay, God, where do we need to go? And listening to the heart of the person, because the heart of the person is huge in terms of how I should be responding to that person.
Right. And that humility piece too, what you're talking about is just recognizing that I don't know. Because I may think I know what's best for you. And maybe in the long term, I do know it's best for you to stop doing drugs, let's just say, or whatever.
That's a pretty good bet.
That's a pretty good, that's a pretty good, right? That I do know that that's what's best for you. But the truth is, this day may not be that day. And that's hard to admit, that this day may not be the day that you're going to be able to stay sober.
Well, if I force you into not using today and you become bitter towards me in that process, now when you would have been ready a day later, 2 days later, a week later, you've got that bitterness towards me, and my chance of really now being able to speak to you what I might have been able to speak if I hadn't created the alienation, it's gone.
Right. So maybe coming at it from a different approach. I don't know. I'm just thinking about having a common enemy, right? So I try to think of it, because to me it is very much a spiritual battle. Addiction is a very spiritual battle. It's not actually this person I'm fighting. I'm not fighting this addict. I am fighting that force that is on them, that law that they're under, and that negative force. And they're fighting it too. So I don't know, maybe it's the exhorter in me. That's a word that you use. My approach is generally to help them to understand, look, we're fighting a common enemy here. And they may not even realize that it is an enemy, because it's been a solution for a long time. That has
been a seemingly good one.
Right. Alcohol was my best friend. And when I was approached with what you're talking about, put the plug in the jug, just don't drink no matter what, all these kind of things that people say, that's my best friend you're telling me not to talk to. What are you going to give me in its stead,
Well, in addiction, there is a frenemy.
Yeah. There
is a friend within the enemy, which is why they drink. I need to drink because. And so you're totally right. If I'm not able to offer you something beyond, above what that frenemy is offering, how in the world can you take that away from me? And it is hard.
Yeah.
And so again, one of the most powerful things you have to do is be able to slow that down and admit your powerlessness. Miss Ashley here, which I'll pick on for a moment. I mean, that's been a hard part of your world. It's kind of like, you assume that you should be able to come in and tell them how it is, and step A, step B, step C. And so heart change just kind of like messed with your entire world because it slows the process down. It's not as efficient. But do you actually believe that statement that I can kind of force you in one conversation, but that's going to add up to the next conversation and the next conversation. And if you want a real wall, run over someone 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and now expect to go in and talk to them and get anywhere. Now you have a real wall that is going absolutely nowhere.
And and it kind of brings up, there has to be a level of want to change for the other person, some level, even a minute level of want to change, and something, how can something that I've heard you say before, how can I help you do this? Not saying this is what you need to do X, Y, and Z, right. But how can I help you? What was the trigger? How do we do this together?
Again, help you. And if you listen to that, I'm powerless. I'm in that statement. I'm recognizing I am powerless to help you unless you empower me. And if you're willing to empower me with the right kinds of things, then potentially I can come alongside and help you get where you want to go. And want to go sometimes isn't positive, it's just an end of the negative. I'm tired of ending up in jail. I'm tired of waking up the next day. I'm tired of destroying all my relationships. I'm tired of, and they don't necessarily even have a positive vision. And frankly, that's part of what I think helps us be more effective. When you're able to see from the negative of where they are to a positive vision, and that's hard to do, but when you're able to see that, that's an additional step. Right. It's not just wow, I'm tired of these negatives. Can you help me out of these negatives? I'm able to say, well, I'll hit you there and I'll raise you on. Mm-hmm. We'll not only get rid of your negatives, but we'll begin to give you some vision towards some positives.
Right, because a lot of times this is a generational curse, addiction and alcoholism. So it has been generations upon generations to where this way of life is the only thing that's normal. So they may not even be able to imagine anything outside of that. If they've not, until I had any significant amount of time sober, growing spiritually, having some success in my life, it would have been absolutely impossible for me to envision that. I've heard people for years say, if you had told me ahead of time what I was going to get from staying sober, being on a spiritual path, I would have sold myself way short, because I wouldn't have been able to even envision it, because we can't. It's the only normal life.
And you talk about a wall. That's another wall. People think inside of their normal. So I've grown up in a culture. I've grown up with failure. I've grown up inside of those things. If I come to you and I start trying to talk to you outside of that normal, again, glazed look, stare, and we're back to can't versus won't, there's a level at which your normals are so defining, so clearly defining, you can't think outside of that normal. So that's another part of this. A lot of times when I'm approaching people, it's like I know that on a good day, I'm going to get this one little nibble. I mean, that's it. Mm-hmm. I've got this one little nibble, and I better be happy with that one little nibble, because if I'm not happy with that and express some level of approval, that person's going to, again, feel judged. They're going to feel belittled, etc. And if I'm not able to handle that one little piece, I'm done. I'm done from that point forward. I didn't quite have a wall. I got one little token, seemingly nothing. But if I don't appreciate that, then the next time I talk to them, there'll be an even tougher wall. And the normals do that. They set up these blockades. They set up I'm living inside of this universe.
Right. Well, in the Christian language, we would call it a stronghold, mm-hmm. Right? That's we're living inside of.
I was thinking about his talk about normals. in the early years of Omega Project, I believe you guys had an individual living with you, and this individual grew up in a household where his parents fought all the time.
Out loud, full volume.
Yeah. And if you spend any time with him and Kelly, their fighting's cute. We'll call it that. Their version of fighting is cute. And so they have disagreements.
And what do you mean by cute?
It's what any other normal person would call a disagreement. There's not really it's not really a fight.
Right.
It's not really a fight. It's a disagreement.
Right.
I yell at her with my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but this individual, after living inside the house and I don't do
It was
you
about
remember?
60 days.
60 days. Had to leave because they couldn't take it.
Because it was so quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No drama.
I remember him come to me multiple times. You guys just never fight. You've got to be fighting. It's behind closed doors.
Did he think you went outside to the barn or something?
I guess we went to the outhouse. We might have still had the old outhouse in those days. I don't know.
Well, last week, maybe it was on Thursday when we were doing the show about school shootings. We talked about the dopamine response, and one of the realizations that I had during that conversation is how dull and dead life can seem to someone who has only been in those elevated states, and it can literally feel like a depression, like a grief, like it feels deep just because nothing's happening.
Like normal life feels like depression.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Let me break in. We do have a question or comment.
Yes, we have one from one of our viewers, Jane. She says, in your opinion, what is the difference between boundaries and walls? And do you have any recommendations on how to maintain healthy boundaries versus putting up walls?
No.
It's a good question.
That's
for sure.
excellent.
Yeah.
No, it is good. I actually deal with a number of people who don't know that I even want to get into it, but that I call intercessors or spiritually sensitives, who don't have healthy boundaries. In other words, things just kind of float in and out, and it's like they have absolutely no control. And the word that I would use there is boundaries. They don't have healthy boundaries. They don't have a filter. And there's a level at which we need to create filters that are healthy filters of, okay, that person really doesn't hate me. They're having a bad day filter. And so what do? I put up a filter to where I receive the communication inside of what's a little bit more reasonable, etc. Then there are walls to where what we've been discussing today, I'm seeing inside of my junk. I'm seeing inside of my normals. I'm seeing inside of my bitterness, and there's just flat a wall there. Right. That I couldn't hear you, I couldn't receive from you. There's absolutely
So a
nothing.
boundary, from what you're saying, is more of a choice to maintain healthiness.
You have to have boundaries. We live in a fallen, selfish world. If you don't have a good filter, but the boundaries of where you distrust, and I'm going to use that word, I think is probably the most powerful word, where there's just high levels of distrust and an assignment of bad motives and that sort of thing continually. Now we've got walls. And we've got the kind of walls to where I'm never going to connect. I'm never going to interact except totally on my terms.
Why are you looking at me?
I was not looking at you. I just happened to go back and forth.
No, you know that it's the truth for me. I mean, for sure. I think I'm still learning that boundaries are, for me, boundaries or filters are something that I need to communicate. You know, that's something where I say, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm picking up on. This is what's okay with me. This is what I'm willing to do. Those are boundaries. The walls, I largely don't even realize are there. Mm-hmm. And other people perceive it and feel it. And then I'm perceiving their perception of my wall. And I'm like, Why do they not understand anything? I'm on this side of the wall. Why do they not understand what I'm
You
saying?
get defensive of them.
Right?
Those are my walls.
Or I'm confused. I feel impotent. I feel like, why am what I'm saying not working? So it's almost like an echo chamber, like you were talking about. I'm living in there with all my own stuff.
Well, to be specific,
Yeah.
you got a lot of caregiver going.
Yeah.
So you're coming in and you have some teacher there. So you're coming in instructing. And so then it's very easy for them, because they have walls up, it's easy for them to immediately go, oh, she's talking down to me.
Right.
She's trying to manipulate me. She's trying to control me. So then their walls go up. Well, when their walls go up, then your caregiver need isn't being met. And it's like, well, you know, and it just becomes this competing fire that's going back and forth. And so then we've got our walls, and it's
Right.
like, man, I'm talking to a wall, and the other person feels like they're talking to a wall. That's just great communication. It's going to produce health. That was sarcasm, by the way. So
Yeah. I can handle your sarcasm. That's okay. Not everybody can, though. You know, some people are really sensitive
Well-
to that. My sister was very sensitive to that, and my
It
family.
took me a
My
while.
family is very sarcastic, and we have nicknames for each other, and you know. But my sister was just. She was just different growing up, and she would cry and run off into the back room, and you know, everybody's like, "What? Where'd she go?"
I had to ask my husband 2 or 3 times, was he serious?
Yeah.
Because he says it so seriously, and you're like, wait. What?
no, that is, when it's done well, it's a communication technique. But if you're actually looking at me going, was he serious? How do I take that? Well, I didn't communicate very well, did I?
Right.
Well, I was also like at that point, like more intimidated by you. And so like sarcasm, it didn't occur to me you were being sarcastic. I was like, oh, he's serious.
It is funny. That happens a lot in the pastoral role and the father-in-law role and things like that, where I just kind of live pretty down to earth, you know, and
People don't expect that.
and they don't expect that. And so they're like, okay, we don't know what to do. No, just like presume I'm a normal person, just talking to you, and you probably will understand better what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to Jane's question, well, I mean, help me with this. We were just talking about it, so let's do it. So to Jane's question about how to set boundaries, what I was asking Pastor about is how do I know when it's safe to come out from behind that wall? Where does that discernment come from? How do I know when...
You say wall, but I feel like what you're saying is like strong boundary. Like how do I know
Girl.
when to like?
I have a wall.
You have a wall.
Oh, yes.
So I feel like the wall is more of a like a negative thing you're putting up.
No, well, I think it may be perceived as that. For me, it's my safe place that I go, and
It's comfy.
it is. I mean, so we'll just be real. So last week, one of the girls here in the program was like, whenever I talk to you, sometimes when I talk to you, I feel like I'm talking to a therapist, and a therapist has never been able to get through to me. And so you're not going to get through to me talking to me like that. I like it a lot better when you're just being my friend, right? And I didn't even realize that I came at things like that, you know. So after thinking about it for just a few minutes, it wasn't hard for me to see, well, yeah, I went to school to become a counselor. They literally program that out of you. You're not keeping professional distance. You need to keep professional distance at all times. And that was part of the reason why I left the counseling department, because I hated that. I hate being talked to like that. So as soon as she said it, I was like, whoa. She showed me a wall that I didn't know was there. You know, my boundaries are a little different. That's something that I've set, you know, and
You're
said,
aware of that.
right. But a wall I may not even be conscious of. It's become a normal for me. Yeah.
Well, the question that you asked a little bit ago was safe.
Yeah.
You know, how do I feel safe? And I'm going to be negative and say, you can't.
Right.
We live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. So until I develop confidence in the grace of God to catch me, then my chances of being able to take that risk are slim to none. Now, the second place that I can go, I can develop confidence in certain people. So if I have confidence in God and I have confidence in a mentor or a father or mother or whatever, some kind of a figure, then it's safe enough to peek out a little bit, because I know if I get bloodied and bruised, I at least have some place to go. And that's frankly where it starts. It doesn't start with, okay, I'm going to really suck it up here and I'm going to be tough today and I'm going to be this brave person. Well, okay, go ahead and try that once or twice.
It only invites more.
Well, it does, because the message you're setting up,
Absolutely.
you're going to get bad stuff
Right.
back.
My father is the one who showed me that. He said, you always act so tough. I don't know that things are hurting you. So I realized that I had been creating my own pain and my own misery because I act like I can handle it. And then I take my little wounds behind my wall and try to heal myself with them, which is where a boundary needed to be set. And
when you're peeking out from behind the wall, you're virtually guaranteed to get the response you're afraid of.
yeah,
Until you actually develop, and again, it sounds like a catch-22, but develop some relationships where there is some safety and some comfort, then your ability to do these other relationships is going to be fairly limited. But that's where the God relationship is really powerful. When you start experiencing a receiving lifestyle, I make a lot of, there's basically two religions in the world. One is where you try to become like God, and at some point you fail and you figure out that you can't do it. And the other is where you realize that you can't become like God, and you cry out for help, and God shows up and actually rescues you and lifts you up and carries you and keeps you in a better place. When I serve that kind of a God and I hit these trouble points and there's tremendous pain and the comfort of God shows up, the healing of God shows up, now I have more confidence to face pain the next time. And if I'm around God's servants who echo that same kind of a thing, where I have somebody I can go to, now I have more confidence to peek out from behind the wall, and I'm hopefully peeking out from a way that's projecting better stuff, which means that I have a better chance of getting a better response in that new situation. And it always ends up, it's going to compound one way or the other. It's either going to compound towards safe, towards a greater sense of being relaxed, towards a greater sense of connection, or it's going to compound towards distrust, woundedness, brokenness. And it's that woundedness, brokenness, pride, I'm in control piece that is separated from other human beings that creates that block that is today's topic of, oh, I just hit a wall and what do I do?
right.
So, okay, you have now realized you have this wall. Is there any, I like practical steps.
Mm-hmm.
I want a 1, 2, 3, here you are. Is there any steps to taking down this wall?
Well, back to the addict world, wow, good luck. When people come into the program, I say, look, I don't expect you to trust me. Accountability is the baby step towards trust, so can we at least work on being accountable? And then having conversations about, is it safe, is it smart? So if you're really in that zone, at some point you look around for somebody who has what I call good fruit. They have good outcomes.
Right.
Don't expect good outcomes from somebody who has terrible fruit. So you look around, you try to find somebody who has good outcomes, and you assume, okay, there must be something right about this person. And then you peek out from behind the wall and you begin to interact with that particular person. So learn to take trust steps, and accountability is a trust step. You learn to take trust steps with people who have good fruit, and you start there. That's your baby step. That's how you get started, and then hopefully you can build from there.
And I also need to say that, like in the 12-step world, it's often said when you're looking for a sponsor, choose someone who has what you want. But it also needs to be said that doesn't mean the cutest boyfriend, the fastest car, the best job, the biggest house. That is not fruit. That's not fruit.
That's possessions.
That's right. So, looking for someone who has a sense of peace about them, looking for someone who consistently seems to be able to, like one of my mentors, for example, has blown my mind that she shows up consistently every time with her mom going through dementia, her dad just passing away. Like and I'm just looking at her like, this is a woman with some integrity. She has every reason to say, I can't be there. And she still shows up. It blew my mind. And cool, come in, she'll be real about it. You know, hey, here's what I'm going through. Just need to let you know ahead of time. And then conversation carries on. And I've just watched like her grace in handling those things. And that's the kind of fruit that I think that's what I want.
Mm-hmm.
I want that kind of grace under fire. I want that kind of integrity. I want that. That's the kind of fruit that we really have to start looking for. And it's so rare that you might miss it if you're not looking, you know?
And or you're looking for the hot car or whatever. You're looking for the wrong kinds of things, and so you get sucked in a way that just isn't good. And I love the integrity word. I'm glad you brought that, because just that integrity, that consistency, finding somebody who's able to see you and care about you, and they're not totally caught up in their own stuff. That's just so important. And again, I hate it, but those people are more rare. Yeah. But when you can get a hold of that and you can really begin to drink that in, you need safe experiences. You need healthy, wholesome experiences in order to get to a better place. You got to have a foundation. You've got to start somewhere.
And a big piece of the Safe Layer in the Step-by-Step series is about being consistent no matter what's brought to you, you know? So like how I learned that I'm safe is, can I show you this much ugly? You know, can I ugly cry? Can I say a cuss word? Can I get mad? Can I slam the phone down? Can I throw something? I mean, it's just like a child really learning to test boundaries. But will you still love me? That doesn't mean that you just allow all of it. You can definitely set your own boundaries and say, okay, we're not going to use that word here, or we're not going to throw things, or we're not going to break things. But also, I also get where you're coming from. So maybe instead of that, we use this other word, or we do this other thing. But just being that consistent person who does speak truth, because I think that's another trap that I know I've been in as a caregiver, where anything went. Oh, this is as a giver, this is a wounded child. I need to just let them throw a temper tantrum. I need to let them say whatever they need to say, do whatever they need to do. I need to be that safe person for them. But I was also not pointing out booby traps and failings and all of those types of things. And I need people in my life who can say, hey, you got your wall up right now, girl. Mm-hmm. And it's all right. I just want you to let you know I see it.
Mm-hmm.
We could keep going on this one.
We could.
Yep.
It's probably good to wrap it up. I will come back to and just kind of highlight, again, we talked about the Safe step-by-step series. Safe is covered in that. And we encourage you to check out Live Free Men, M-I-N, Live Free Men on the YouTube channel. Check it out, subscribe. We're actually climbing up the ladder, and the more views that you get, the more people end up seeing that. So you can actually help us spread the message by liking and subscribing and passing messages on to other people. That would be a great help to us. I hope this has been an amazing blessing to you today. I feel like we're really working in that area of equipping people to work with other people. And thank you so much for joining us today.